Welcome to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur podcast. I am your host, Kayleigh Greenacre, a business strategist, coach, TEDx speaker, author, and your go-to woman for all things business strategy. I am obsessed with supporting female entrepreneurs to grow unstoppable six and multi-six-figure businesses that they love, giving them the freedom and life that they desire. During this podcast, I'll be sharing with you everything that you need to become a successful female entrepreneur, from the mindset shifts to sales and marketing strategies, and how to become an iconic leader that people can't get enough of. It is my mission to help you stand out, attract your dream clients and customers, and sell out of your offers with ease whilst building the business and life of your dreams. Let's make this your reality, ladies. Hello, ladies, and welcome to another episode of Actually I Can, the Female Entrepreneur podcast. And in today's episode, I'm going to be diving into getting intentional and choosing to stand out in 2026. Now, I'm really excited because this is the very first episode of the year of 2026. We're currently on the 5th of January. And I've been thinking a lot about how I wanted to begin this year with you, because the first conversation, we know it always really matters. It sets the tone, not just for what we talk about, but for how we move through the months ahead. And I didn't want to start the year adding to all of the noise out there or the urgency or feeling that you need to rush into becoming someone different overnight, because you don't. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to a new year, and I'm sure you know this already. Pressure to decide really quickly and make these big, bold decisions right now, here, today. Pressure to have a plan, pressure to know exactly where you're going and how you're going to get there. And whilst clarity is important, I don't believe that it actually comes from forcing decisions before you're actually connected to yourself. So this episode is about intention in a deeper sense, not the kind that looks good written down, but the kind that quietly changes the way that you think, you choose, you show up, and of course, you lead. It's about setting goals from truth instead of the pressure, about understanding the role identity plays in everything you create, and about what it really means to stand out and be visible in a world that's becoming more automated by the day, because we know that AI is taking over. Now, I want this to feel like a grounded conversation you can return to, not something that you just consume once and forget about. Just come back to this episode as and when you need to throughout the year. Now, I want to start with goals, because it's where most people begin a new year, and also where a lot of frustration tends to live. Now, for a long time, I set goals the way we're taught to. I focused on the outcomes, the numbers, the timelines, the milestones, believing that if I could just get clearer and more disciplined, things would fall into place. And whilst that approach can work on the surface, what I eventually noticed was that some goals felt heavy almost as soon as I set them, whilst others felt grounded and expansive. So the difference wasn't the size of the goal itself, it was actually the identity I was setting them from. So when goals are created from comparison, fear, or a sense of being behind, they carry that energy into everything that you do. So you end up pushing yourself through resistance, questioning your decisions, and actually wondering why something you wanted so badly now feels draining. But when goals come from alignment, they feel steady. They invite growth rather than actually demand it. So as you think about what you want this year, it's worth slowing down enough to actually notice where your desire is coming from, whether it feels rooted in the truth or whether it's trying to fix something you feel about yourself. Because goals don't just shape your year, they actually reveal your relationship with yourself. So this is where intention comes in, and not in the surface level way it's often talked about. For me, intention is not something that you decide once and you move on from. It's actually something that you live inside of. Okay, so it's present in all of those small moments that don't actually look significant, but quietly they are defining your year, like how you respond to something that doesn't go to plan, for example, or how you speak to someone when you're tired, or whether you follow through on what you said previously. Intention is what shapes your decisions when no one is actually watching you, okay? When there's no immediate reward, and when it would be easier, to be honest with you, to default back to your old patterns. And it's the difference between choosing from self-trust and choosing from self-doubt. So personally, for me, as I've grown, I've realized that years don't actually change because of big declarations at the beginning. They don't. They change because of consistent, aligned decisions. And those decisions only become possible when you're honest about what you're available for and what you're no longer willing to carry. So 2026 doesn't need you to do more. It actually needs you to decide more consciously.
So everything you're working towards this year already belongs to a version of you that exists, even if you haven't fully embodied her yet. And that can sound a little bit abstract until you actually realize how often your daily choices are reinforcing an identity without you actually noticing. So the way you speak about your work, the way you handle uncertainty, the way you show up when something feels a little bit uncomfortable, all of it is actually shaping who you believe yourself to be. And your business, your visibility, and your results will never outgrow that self-concept. So this is why identity work, it shouldn't be optional. Even if you don't consciously engage with it, it's actually happening either way. So the difference is whether you're reinforcing identity built on hesitation and self-protection, or one that's built on trust within yourself, and of course, leadership. And identity doesn't shift through this motivation. It actually shifts through repeated action, through doing the thing you said mattered, even when it feels really, really vulnerable, and through keeping promises to yourself, through choosing alignment over that approval. So this year in 2026, it will respond to who you believe you are far more than what you actually say that you want. Okay, so identity is really, really important. Now, every meaningful year I've had personally has involved some kind of release. Okay, even when I didn't label it in that kind of way at the time, because it does sound a little bit quirky when you say you need to release something. But I want to talk about letting go, right? Letting go doesn't always look dramatic. And to be honest with you, especially if you're an introvert like me, it's often quite quiet and quite internal. And it's recognizing that certain habits, patterns, or even expectations no longer fit the life that you're building, even if they once served you. Right? It's about noticing where you're still operating from familiarity rather than from actual truth. So sometimes what needs to be released is the need to be understood by everyone. Sometimes it's the belief that you have to explain yourself to earn your place in the online space, for example. Sometimes it's the version of productivity that leaves you depleted but feeling virtuous. If you carry old identities into a new year, they will shape your decisions before you release what's happening. And that's why intention without release rarely creates change. So as you move into 2026, it's worth asking what you're ready to put down, okay? What you're ready to release. Not because anything is wrong, but because it's no longer reflects who you are as an individual. So now let's talk about standing out in a world of AI, okay? We can't talk about this year without acknowledging the world that we're in. AI is changing how content is created. It's how information is being shared and how quickly things are moving. And it's understandable, but this brings up uncertainty about relevance, about visibility, about value, and ultimately about business as a whole. But what I keep coming back to is this: information, okay, has never been the thing that creates connection. It never has. It's all about the meaning. So AI, if we look at AI, okay, it can replicate structures. It can replicate the language that you use. It can even replicate your tone nowadays, which is fantastic. But it cannot replicate lived experiences or emotional intelligence or the kind of insight that comes from having walked something yourself. And it doesn't carry intuition or embodied understanding. So in a world where content is now everywhere, especially AI content, depth does become the differentiator. Okay. And depth doesn't come from trying to sound impressive or, being really, really loud. It actually comes from being really, truly honest, from speaking clearly about what you actually believe. Think about your values, your beliefs, your opinions. That is what counts. And from sharing perspectives that are shaped by experiences rather than trends. That is how you're going to stand out in a world, the AI world, as we call it now, in 2026. So standing out in 2026 won't be about producing more. You don't need to produce loads and loads and loads more content. It will be about being recognizable. It will be about being the iconic leader that I've been talking about for the last 3 or so years, all right? About letting people feel your voice, your values, and your leadership through everything that you share. That is how you're going to stand out this year. And now visibility is kind of linked to this. So visibility has changed meaning for me over time. And it's no longer about being everywhere. You know, a couple of years ago, people were saying, in fact, even I heard it last year in 2025, people were saying, you've got to be everywhere, be on every single platform, you know, post every day, share with everyone what you're eating for breakfast, blah, blah, blah. And I still feel like that was a thing from back in 2022. You know, it isn't any longer about being everywhere or saying everything. It's actually about being really crystal clear and consistent in who you are. So when you're anchored in your identity, visibility becomes an extension of your self-respect. That is my personal belief. Okay. You're not performing. You're actually expressing. Okay. You're not chasing this attention. You're actually taking responsibility for your own voice, because remember, your own voice is so powerful, and it can be powerful, but you need to be able to share it. Now, I know that visibility can feel uncomfortable, you know, especially if you're a little bit nervous about getting in front of the camera, or you're kind of self-protecting yourself in one way or another. But hiding has a cost as well, right? And it often shows up in stagnation, frustration, or a sense that you're meant for more, but you can't quite reach it. So in 2026, the women who will lead are the ones who stop asking whether they're allowed to take up space and start asking how they can do it honestly. It will be the women who show up as an iconic leader. It will be the women who share their own values, their beliefs, their opinions without hesitation, because they know they have got something to share and they know the worth of their voice and what they have to say. So if you're going to plan this year, I'm going to encourage you right now to start internally. Before you reach for a planner or start mapping out your goals, you might have already mapped out your goals, but really look at the work internally. Spend time with who you're becoming, with what matters now, not what mattered a couple of years ago, with the kind of pace, presence, and leadership you want your life to be built on. And from that place, goals become supportive rather than demanding. And they start to make sense. They start to, they feel like expressions of who you are rather than testing you to do things because you feel like you've got to do it. That's how intention really does become sustainable. And that's how years change without actually burning you out, which is really important because I don't want you to burn out. So as you step into 2026, I want to invite you to choose intention over urgency. Choose clarity over noise. Remember, we don't need to be noisy. And then truth over performance. We are not here to perform. We're here to share our vision, our values, our beliefs, our opinions. You don't need to rush into this year. You need to arrive at it in your own time. And regardless of whether you're looking at the date today, if you're listening to this podcast as this is today, Monday, the 5th of January, if you haven't yet arrived at that, if you haven't looked at your internal work and then mapped out your goals, don't worry. Arrive in it in your own time. And when you do, when you move from who you are rather than who you think you should be, everything you build becomes steadier, more meaningful, and honestly, it will feel so much more aligned. And you will thank me for this, 100%. So I really, really hope that this has helped you and supported you in looking at how to start a new year in a slightly different way to what most people are talking about out there. Thank you so, so much for joining me for today's episode. If you feel that this will benefit someone else, then please do share this episode and share the podcast with your friends, your family, your colleagues, anyone who you think will benefit. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And I will see you all again next time. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur Podcast with me, your host, Kayleigh Greenacre. If you are ready to build, grow, and scale your dream 6-figure or multi-6-figure business, then head to our website now for more information or connect with me on socials to see how you can create your dream business and dream life.